So I'd like to welcome all of you for our second annual Scholar Series with Dr. Thomas Herman, who came all the way up from San Diego, so we so appreciate. Tim has been passing out subject matter folders to let you know kind of where we are as a program. We are one of the 9 sponsored, state-funded subject matter grants. So CGEP NorCal, sounds so much cooler than CGEPSSU, but SSU is cool too. So California Global Education Project is housed here. We have changed our curriculum, and Miriam was the former director for how many years, Miriam? 22 years. Everybody say hi to Miriam.
Hey, Miriam.
And I worked for Miriam forever. Welcome, Miriam. Thank you for coming. She's now on our board, so now I'm a little nervous that she's here right now. So I wanted to introduce and kind of give you some context. If you look at the subject matter pamphlet, we crossed out and gave it the new name that got changed over the summer. And also, Dr. Herman with the Global Alliance is a partner of CGEP. As I said last time, we give everything an acronym because that's what we do in education. And that's how we function. So again, my name is Nancy Case Rico. Also, on my 19th year of teaching in the School of Education. These are my students. Currently, raise your hand. Yay! They have to be here. No, they're very dear for coming. They've got a huge project coming up on Tuesday, so I'm really excited that they took time out to come today. And just as of July, I'm the new director of CGEP, so I'm super excited to be here and to introduce this program and grow with all of you. I have a little small power team that helped me start back in July, and I could not be here today if it weren't for them. So I'd like to first introduce our school board member. This is Melanie Blake.
Hi.
Melanie's a school board member for Sonoma Valley High. She's also Sonoma Valley Unified School District. She is my outreach coordinator. She's helping me find grants. She's helping me organize workshops, and she's been to all the trainings with me. And most of her work has been in kind, which means it's been dedicated. Melanie's been a teacher and administrator, and special ed is her wheelhouse, so I couldn't be here without her. All of these beautiful flyers that you see, and the new website that's right here, if you haven't checked us out, Twitter, social media, has been designed and facilitated by my tech director, Andy Mitchell. He's been amazing also with getting this started. Dr. Suarez, where are you? Mike Suarez is the School of Education professor that I roped in to help spread the word and help be our voice and how we fit into the School of Education, which has been an interesting transition because we're in a new school. And then, not last but not least, but our 3rd Scholar Series, which will be on the 26th, you'll get an email, will be with Tim and Rachel. They're my global leads. They're teaching global studies and ethnic studies out at Annalee. I got them with the deal. I inherited them with the CGEP project, and I'm going to kind of do everything that they want me to do because I want them to keep being part of our program. And we're trying to build capacity. We're trying to build teacher leaders. Some of you have been leads with us before, so I'm really happy for all of you to be here today. So the purpose of the Scholar Series is to slowly introduce all of you to the global competencies and to CGEP and our program. We had Dr. Bruce here in October. How many of you were at Dr. Bruce's presentation? Thank you very much. He wished you well today, his colleague from San Diego State University. And then all of us are going to try to build capacity and figure out how we move forward. We had 96 people here, well 93 because my 3 family members don't count, back in October. This is a great showing today. December's a tough month. I appreciate all of you here very much, and you won't be disappointed with Dr. Herman today. So with that said, I wanted to go ahead and introduce Dr. Herman, and I tried to be creative and go online, and I Googled Dr. Herman to find out what I could say. And I was going to be very, very diligent, and he has 8 Google pages. Not 8 Google sites. He has.
There's a college football coach that is very gets paid a lot more than I do as my same name.
Unless he's rolling out the global competencies and doing programs for kids in schools, that's not him. So I went through everything and tried to pull pieces out to introduce Tom today, but then I went ahead and realized that he is part of the CGEP program as the director of the California Geographic Alliance. So I went to our homepage and found an amazing blurb to introduce him. So Tom came from San Diego last night. He's up here for the weekend. He's here for all of you and for all of us to continue to kick off our program. So with that, I'm going to embarrass you now. You ready?
Feel free.
Okay. So
I'll be looking up.
Dr. Tom Herman from the Geographic Alliance. In this capacity, he explores, expands, and explains the field of geography education while developing and delivering professional learning experience for K-12 educators. He works in schools with local, state, and national education organizations to promote contemporary geography education and meaningful use of geospatial technologies. He's going to tell you about that today. He finds innovative ways to increase support and resources for K-12 geography education in California and increase the number of students choosing geography as a field of study at the college level. In addition, he is the director of the Young People's Environmental Society and Space, yes, of course that's an acronym, the Research Center at San Diego State University. Tom provides technical assistance in the form of program evaluation and program development to community-based and youth and family-serving programs. His goal is to partner with nonprofit organizations and local governments to provide strategic support for programs that make a positive impact on children, families, and neighborhoods. Tom is adjunct professor of geography at San Diego State University with more than 20 years of experience teaching urban, social, and cultural geography, as well as research techniques. His research interests focus on the social geographies of children, families, and communities, as well as the evolution of urban neighborhoods. He earned his BA in geography from Villanova University, his MA in geography from New Mexico State University, and his PhD in geography from SDSU and from Santa Barbara. Tom is a humanist and a passionate geographer who is endlessly interested in people's geographic experiences and strategies and in finding ways to support all kinds of people in having a quality of life and opportunities for self-expressions. Please welcome Dr. Herman to Sonoma State University.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm getting to know the space over here and the technology and trying to create less likelihood of tripping over things because I tend to roam and get lost in my thoughts. But I'm super happy to be here. I'm really happy to meet with teachers and future teachers and because I think you're doing really the most important, perhaps most challenging work in the country. So thank you for doing that. And so I hope to be at least a little bit helpful, maybe more than a little bit helpful. And when I speak to groups of teachers, I'm constantly kind of trying to balance between resources, because you've got lots and lots of time with students and lots of things you're trying to teach them. And I know that teachers are hungry for resources you can bring into the classroom and use to generate understanding with students. But I find also when it comes to geography, we need to think, we need to dwell in geography a little bit to understand how to deploy those resources better. And so in what I've kind of decided to do over time is to be a little bit more conceptual and theoretical and presenting, but also make sure to get the resources to you. So I'll explain how I'm going to try and do that and not go 2 hours instead of 1 hour. Right? It's 1 hour, not 2?
1 hour, then we have a quick break, and then it's debrief with teachers.
Okay. I talk a lot. So now what I'd like to know is, are there any geographers in the room? Okay, that makes it a little safer, because geography is a really big field, and at times today I will sound like I'm representing and knowledgeable about the entirety of geography, which I can only do when there are no geographers in the room. If there are geographers in the room, I'd have to apologize for that attempt to lasso the whole thing. So, okay, I want you to know this. This is important because all of the slides, everything I'm going to show you today is linkable right now. I just uploaded it to my Google Drive and made a shareable link. So don't bother writing anything down. If you've got a device, you can pull up the slides. There's going to be tons of links, lots of live links. There's tons of slides. We won't get to all the slides. We won't click all the links. This is the resource-rich PowerPoint that you can go back to and get value out of for years to come, or until all those links die on the internet, because things don't live that long on the internet. And I also wrote it down here, so once I flip away from here and you're trying to get that URL down, you can get it. All right, so here's what I think we can do within the scope of today's meeting. We can talk about alignment and some goals. As I just mentioned, teachers are trying to do an amazingly complex, almost impossible job within a pretty restricted time and space that they have access to students. So one of the ways to do the best possible work is to think about how you can, this is a terrible expression, but kill multiple birds with one stone, especially because I was just staring out of this tree and all the birds. Let's not kill any birds with any stone. But we can take care of multiple tasks simultaneously. We can multitask. And so I think there's something really productive about, and that's why I kind of put global and local together in the title, to think about how things that seem different and maybe oppositional are actually kind of contained within each other. And so also I wanted to think about the ways in which our goals as educators and what we hope to accomplish in our work with students, how that might be pretty different than what kids are trying to do with their lives between the time that we're forcing them to listen to lectures and complete tests and things, right? They're trying to do something quite different. They're trying to figure out what's out there for me, and you're trying to make sure they know what's out there generically, and that's maybe a little bit of tension. So if we can figure out ways to align that, we can get kind of all of the wheels moving in the same direction. We can get a lot farther. So in order to do that and to convince you that geography is a key way of thinking about aligning those things and bringing them together, I need to explain to you what I understand geography is and why, what particular aspects of geography I think are helpful in instruction. So across all subjects. Not so, the last second I thought, my title says in geography education. But I think geography education is embedded within all subjects. So whether we're talking about math or literature, social studies, the whole range of social studies, physical sciences, so all of the exciting STEM things, geography is there in all of it. And in fact, I would make the bold assertion that none of it's useful in any way whatsoever unless you relate it to geography. Because there's one absolute fact of our lives is that they're going to take place on Earth. And so all of that information actually applies to real places and integrates in those places and across the space of the planet. So, and then I'm going to get to hopefully recommending some strategies and linking some tools that you can use to kind of get your students involved in this. So let's go. So first of all, why do I think what I think? And I'm going to give this particular talk to you. And as I mentioned to Nancy before, I kind of never give the same talk twice, so this is exactly me thinking about this day, this audience, what I did know about you, which frankly isn't a whole lot, and trying to figure out what's useful. So this is just, Saturday in December 2018's version of what I'm thinking. And I've been a geographer for basically 30 years. I had no idea there was such a thing as a major in geography or jobs that geographers were qualified for until I found myself in a university taking elective courses, and some of them were called geography. In California, we don't have courses called geography in most schools. We have combined history and geography courses. Everybody forgets the and geography. It's like they remember the truncated version that appears on the student schedules. History and then it's just nothing. That's kind of how we teach it. And I had a similar experience. I grew up in Wisconsin, South Jersey, and Washington, D.C. And I had lots and lots of history experiences and education, but almost no geography. So on that fateful day, third semester at Villanova, when I was told that liberal arts was not in fact a major, it was just buying you 3 semesters of time to decide what your major was, and my 3 semesters were up, I was sitting in a geography class, and I thought, okay, what are my choices here? There's only one class that's even been remotely useful to figuring out what's going on in the world. It's this geography course, so I'm a geography major, and that stuck. And as a geographer, you can study anything, because as I pointed out, our life happens on this planet. Geography is study of the earth. So it's all in play when you're a geographer. So I started out, at that time I decided I was a geography major, I was making a map, so I was a cartographer. That's the most simplistic version of what geographers do, they make maps. Okay, I apologize for that simplistic representation of geography, which I will try to obliterate later in the presentation. I went to New Mexico State and I learned about wilderness management and natural resource management. I did a wilderness plan for a wilderness area in Arizona, fabulous place, Sierra Ancha Wilderness near Young, Arizona, can't recommend it enough. Hiked every trail in the wilderness area, saw 3 people. My research was supposed to be about how being in a wilderness area affected people's perception of wilderness areas. 3 is not a sufficient sample size. So I decided if I wanted to talk to people, I should go to where there's lots of people. And I came to San Diego State, I became an urban geographer. And I studied urban neighborhoods. And then I got really crazy, and I decided to study children's experiences of urban neighborhoods. Because my idea of a geographer back in 1988 was a little bit of a National Geographic version of being a geographer. So there was going to be some exploration, some discovery, and once I started studying geography, I figured out I don't really fit in submarines that well in deep sea exploration, space exploration. These are the discovery zones that are available. They didn't really work for me, but children's experiences of everyday life, totally unknown. Might as well be the top of Mount Everest. So I studied that. And that's important in the way I think about education, because I think education should be in service to kids' goals. And I think this presentation should be in service to teachers' goals, trying to facilitate kids achieving their goals. So 2013, there's this opportunity, something called the Geographic Alliance. What's that? It helps promote geography education. I'm all about geography, let's do that. So what's really important here is I start working with teachers. And I first understand the problem to be teachers have not been trained in geography, so they need kind of supplemental training to bring them up to speed in geography. But what I learn is, I don't know what's happening in K-12 classes. Just because I was a student doesn't mean I really have any idea about what the challenges of teaching are. So the people who got me involved in the Alliance, Emily Shull, who's the executive director of the Global Education Project, was key in this, taught me that you work with teachers on their behalf. You don't try to catch them up to what an academic geographer is doing. You try and figure out how does geography support what they're doing in the classroom. Because it turns out there's only maybe this much space for geography. And so you want to fill that space productively, but you also maybe want to build a little more space by showing how it has threads that build into other things. So more recently, I've had some experiences after I got, related to my role with the Alliance. So there's something called the National Center for Research in Geography Education, which gives me a chance to participate in projects that think in a research frame about how do we do geography instruction? What's the role of geography education? And in particular, this project about learning progressions. Anybody familiar with the concept of learning progressions? They use it a lot in science. So this is very relevant because memory research says a bad idea, a false idea, lodges in your brain and blocks out real information. You might find some relevance to our current events for this idea. But this is really important in education, and it turns out that by the time kids get into formal education, and you're trying to teach about, say, the hydrologic cycle, and you're trying to explain how the water just keeps circulating, and it's really important to ask kids and find out that they believe that when they turn the faucet on in the bathtub, that water's coming from nowhere. So your hydrologic cycle idea doesn't pass the test of reality. Oh, okay, you have to explain there's a pipe that's connected to a reservoir that gathers water, that whole thing. But if you don't confront their actual understanding of the world, you're trying to heap your knowledge on top of their foundation, which doesn't hold your knowledge. So this is a really important idea. And then really super hopefully, in the last couple of years, I've connected with some geographers, I'm going to introduce you to one, who's really thinking the way that I'd like to think about geography and education being in service to personal goals. Okay, so this idea about aligning interests. Here's just some of the different things that I think are valued in the educational environment that we can think about kind of getting into alignment, that we can think of as things we can work on at the same time. So I think most teachers really want to see their kids developing deeper understanding of the processes that generate the kind of characteristics of the world around them. They want them to have critical thinking skills so that they can put A and B together and see that that's generating C or it's impacting some other place, right? With the new framework, since the C3 framework has come out and the new California History Social Science framework, which I've been doing lots of work talking about around the state, trying to explain what that has to do with instruction. Well, there's a new value in kind of civic mindedness and taking informed action. That's great, because what that means is stop dealing with the world in the lens of academic subjects and deal with it in the realm of issues. And those issues don't break down into subjects. They have science and politics merged together. They have personal and political combined, all of these kinds of things. A lot of educators, maybe not classroom teachers as much as administrators and other folks in the kind of educational environment, but they're looking at ways to promote social and emotional development and character development. And teachers are seeing this as a value. We want education to keep us globally competitive. But also schools are really super local institutions, and we want kids to be connected to their community and their local environment. Is there anything anybody would disagree with here? That these are things we're all trying to do? That's a lot. And so how do we get that done? Well, my assertion, my bold claim here is that we have an incredible instructional resource available to us, and it looks like this. And then if we take a geographic perspective and really try to understand our existence on this very real thing, that it forces all of those things to come back together. Geography is a reintegrator. So geography is in fact not supposed to be an academic discipline. In the German model, where we kind of break down the physical and social world into components to start naming and labeling and analyzing it, right? Geography's the mother discipline that's supposed to bring it all back together and put all of that knowledge in context. So geography was in service to exploration and colonialism and imperialism and all that because geography told you how to do stuff. It didn't just tell you what stuff was, it told you now that you know what it is, how do you do something with it? So I'm going to try and build that argument. But I also need to be kind of realistic and say, we're really ill-prepared to take advantage of these benefits I'm going to argue we have. So geography's done pretty well in the sense that since the 1800s, it's been an expected core subject at K-12. And most recently in No Child Left Behind and ESSA, it got called out in a kind of privileged position along with other core subjects that are supported. But somehow geography misses the boat in funding. And somehow geography misses the boat in curriculum. And it just doesn't get represented in the same way that essentially history is ballooned to take over social sciences. And history, pardon me for this assertion, but history is the least critical of all the social sciences. It is, oh, this is really mean, it's a fake news factory. Because history really values narrative, continuity across narrative. And so history kind of sheds facts because they don't fit narrative. And history doesn't look for more facts once the narrative's really stable and nice and tidy. So history really values people, people's ideas, people's wills, people's individual contributions. Geography might say, any person in that place at that time might have been able to do what that person did. I would encourage you to take a really critical look. This is what I like about the play Hamilton. Take a critical look at the Founding Fathers. Were they so awesome? Were they smarter than the people writing the key documents in the French Revolution? No, they were not. This is demonstrably true. Yet we came up with this amazing constitution that's unique and kind of a pivotal moment in modern political organization. How does that happen? It happens because they're sitting in North America, where this idea of a confederate government, where you have layers of responsibility at local, regional, and trans-regional levels, that's already existing here with the Iroquois nations. And they tap into that knowledge that's here, that's place-based knowledge that doesn't exist in France, and it comes up with a better result. It might not be the people. So we've underappreciated and underincorporated geography, and that leaves us in a kind of in a weak spot. Most teachers, when I ask how many courses in geography have you taken, 1 or 2. How many courses in history? It's probably more like 5 or 6. So that's a problem. Geography is doing great in universities. It's become very popular, very impactful, lots of grant money. That's actually caused a worse problem at K-12 because every geography department, including mine at San Diego State, used to have 1 or 2 faculty members who were directly involved in geography education. Pretty much all of the geography departments that can have abandoned that mission. Because guess what? K-12 education is not well funded. That's not a really fruitful area of research if you're a faculty member trying to get notoriety. And geography's got all these other opportunities. So they basically left K-12 behind, said we're not appreciated there, we'll just move on, and we'll complain about how geographically illiterate the students are when they arrive at college. So, okay. So right now, when I'm saying geography, this kind of thing probably pops to mind, right?
Right.
And you're forgiven for this, but let's just get over this, right?
So pretty.
Last year I spoke at NCSS and my title was Beyond Where. And this is what I was trying to tell people. Geography does not ask the question where, any more than history only asks the question when. What's the worst kind of history? A history based on dates. What's the worst kind of geography? A geography based on locations. Simply not the discipline. It is not. It's opposing. It's like a thing you put in the window, like a cutout, that's made to look like somebody is home, but when you get close, you see it's a cardboard cutout. It's not, in fact, a person. That's the same thing with geography. So that's the problem we have with geography. We're losing traction because all geography is a map and pointing to where historical events occurred. And then having a completely lame understanding of the relationship between the two. How many of you believe that the westward progression of United States population was slowed by the physical barrier of the Appalachian Mountains? Do you think, is that? I asked it in a leading way. Because I know 100%
No one's going to say yes now.
I know 100% of classrooms teach this as fact. That a mountain range is a physical barrier, a barrier to migration. So when we look at a map that shows the progression of, or the distribution of US population over time, it stays on the east side of the mountains for a while, and then suddenly it breaks free. And so everybody says, oh, it's physical barrier, you know, that happens all kinds of places, like, you know, the movement over the Himalayas with elephants in order for Hannibal to invade. Yes, but these are the Appalachian Mountains. They are not uncrossable. They are imminently crossable. That has nothing to do with it. 0% explanation. That's wrong. That's not geography. So, do you want to know why?
Yes.
Because the King of England said you're not allowed to transact in real estate west of the Appalachians because we're trying to keep good relations with the Indian tribes. So when we fight our next war with France, they don't join with France and kick our ass, they join with us to kick France's ass. That's why.
Proclamation.
And, by the way, at the same time, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, George Mason, Ben Franklin, they had bought up all of Kentucky and were waiting to get rich in real estate transactions. Geography will teach you real estate transactions, explain why. And they were chomping at the bit to sell that land. Who was it that went to Kentucky and found out what was going on there? Frontier character. Daniel Boone. You know Daniel Boone? You know why Daniel Boone went out there? Advance man for the real estate sales. Find out what's going on there. We bought that land. We want to know what kind of subdivision, what's farmable, how difficult is it going to be to get the natives to move along. That's why. So that's geography. That's how that happens. Same thing. The Great Migration, where African American labor leaves the Southeast to go to the industrial cities. Teachers will say it's because of the availability of jobs in the North, because the working age population had gone to fight the war. So you're telling me a sharecropper in the Yazoo Delta in Mississippi just was like, those industrial jobs up north, they're blooming and just got on. No, they read a newspaper that was printed in Chicago, that was shipped down the rail line to the Delta, that said, "Dear person of the Delta, there are jobs and apartments available in Chicago that black people are allowed to occupy. You might consider this as an alternative to your current situation." It's the information about what was there. So they would have gone whether the jobs were free or not because they believed they were. That's what they were acting on. So one of the things that people in my field have been saying is this idea of geography as maps and saying where things are and answering the question where is so terrible, it has such a negative impact on what we're trying to do that we should abandon it. And I say to them, right, and I think because we have very complex surgeries that we want to advance, we have all these cancers that we need to find cures for, stop teaching anatomy. Oh, when they cut you open, you want them to know the difference between the spleen and the appendix. Oh, I didn't know. But you know, we've got books for that, it's on Google. We need both and. Okay. So instead of asking the question where alone, geographers have been advocating for this where, why, there, why, care. To understand the world as a dynamic place, as an output of processes, not just a thing that magically appears. I don't think you're going to get students along this chain. I think you have to ask this question first. What is it you care about? Oh, let's see where that happens. Probably, if they care about it, it already happens in their local experience. It's part of their local life, their lived experience, which is incredibly localized if you're a K-12 student. So like, ask them that. And so you already know one of the wheres. One of the wheres is here in your life. Where else? And then why in those places? So take their interest and lead them into this question of how is the world a dynamic place that produces all kinds of results? So I mentioned about this, my work with the National Center for Research in Geography Education. And just this year I went to a conference called Powerful Geography. It's a rather grand name, so of course I was like, yes, let's go do that. And Powerful Geography is an American kind of project that builds on a global project called GeoCapabilities. And I'm not 100% convinced about Powerful Geography, the American version. It's like that Fiat 500 was great when it was built in Italy, but when they started building it in America, a little wonky. I just want to share like a 3.5-minute clip because this is David Lambert from University College of London. GeoCapabilities was kind of his brainchild. And I'm going to pop over here and we hope the technology works. It's not always our friend.
Approach, hence the title of our project, GeoCapabilities. Now, there isn't time in this video to talk about the origins of capabilities. It stretches back to an artist work in welfare economics. But to summarise the approach that we've adopted, we're saying a capabilities approach is about human capability, human functionings, which contribute to their ability to operate as agents, as independently minded people in society, in the world. Ultimately, it's about human freedoms. So capabilities is a useful concept because it's not just about skills and competencies, it's about knowledge and understanding as well. It's about what I mentioned earlier, the educated person. To give you some examples, a capable person is autonomous, is able to think and reason. And of course, when we look around the world, not everybody is able to do that for lots of reasons, poverty and so on. Another way of thinking about capability is about the ability to think about choices, about how to live. A third capability set that we're interested in is about the potential people have to understand their potential as creative and productive citizens. Translate that to geography, and we're saying that in terms of autonomy and this ability to think and reason, In geography, we're able to do that about ourselves in a global context and our relational understanding about ourselves in the environment, in society. And that requires knowledge and understanding, powerful disciplinary knowledge that needs to be taught. If you take the idea of choices about how to live, that
Okay, let's skip on to that. So the great thing about British people is they talk so deliberately that they pick their words really well, but we don't have time for that. And sorry about the preview. It turns out you can stay in presentation mode and see videos, so to switch back and forth. Okay, so just to recap, this is the name he mentioned, Amartya Sen. That's the kind of origin of this capability approach to education. By the way, I don't know about you, but the California State Standards, the History Social Science Framework document at 1,000 pages, they don't inspire me to want to teach. Matter of fact, they inspire me to want to think about other options. That little 3 minutes of talking, that's like, oh, right, that was the reason, right? It's to help people be capable, to help them do something for themselves and for the world. And so this is where he got that idea. Now, he developed this idea with a guy named Michael Young about powerful knowledge. Now, interesting, Michael Young wrote this very famous book in the 80s called The Knowledge of the Powerful, where he deconstructed education and said, we're not actually teaching people how to be effective, we're teaching them how to recognize power structures that define the society they live in. We're privileging the knowledge of people who are privileged. And so we're teaching this, for example, to contrast the American Revolution story of the Founding Fathers as this leadership group, as opposed to what you might see in Howard Zinn's History of the United States, right? So he says this is a problem. We're teaching a way in which it basically says, hey, you as the individual person, you're average, you're run-of-the-mill, you're probably not going to do much. But you could know about what happened. That would be really good for you. That's not so cool. So he comes up with this idea about what would powerful knowledge look like. It would be about knowledge that it kind of takes your personal power and says, let's see what we can do with it. Let's see how we can make an impact. And by the way, links down here that you can go back and read where these ideas come from, because in many cases I'm paraphrasing. So geo-capabilities, and this really resonated with me, and I apologize if this in any way denigrates some of what you do in education, but so partly this is what a kind of easy way to remember what geo-capabilities is about. So they talk about Future One. Future One is education. That's really like No Child Left Behind education. It's about assembling facts, seeing how many you can store, and then later, off of our time, you can go see what you can do by assembling those into different kinds of configurations. But we're just going to put facts and figures in front of you. So a more modern version of education says, oh, that's terrible. Students are turned off by the dates, by the place names. So let's teach students the skills of learning. Let's take our time with them in school, kind of like a Common Core approach, and focus on what does it look like to be a skilled information consumer and to evaluate sources and things like that. Okay, that's great, very important, but do we actually get back to the content knowledge? Do we create an accurate map of the world in students' heads that they can begin to think about how they relate to? It's not enough for it to be on a piece of paper or on the computer. It has to be in your head or you're not using it. You don't live in this world, you live in a world that's in here. It tells you where the scary places are, where the great vacation spots are, right? Where the good housing is near to where employment opportunities for you are. That's the world you live in, it's not this one out here. So we need that. We need that basic knowledge. And this Future 3, which I'm a fan of Future 3. Future 3 says we can do both of those. We can learn how to learn and we can learn what is out there. We can actually learn the facts of the matter. Without the facts of the matter, all your explaining, all your argumentation skills are not worth using. There has to be something that's real, that's verified, that's meaningful, and that allows you to make decisions in the future or decisions now that create a future that is desirable and not undesirable. We have incredible knowledge of the world, yet we continue to make decisions that bring about undesirable futures. How do we change that? So that's what we're talking about. That concludes my introduction. It's kind of true that there's 74 slides. This is a diagram that the National Geographic Society has generated. So just think of this as all the kind of content areas of geography, and there's many, many more. And in fact, this is more how that should be represented. They're not nicely stacked up like that. They're all interwoven in ways we could never hope to sort out. We don't know if we cut that one, what all is going to fall apart, right? So think about that instead of this, right? It's interwoven, it's a mesh, and it's a complicated mesh. It's not an orderly weave. But the thing I really want to bring out here is how all of those things cut through and are constituted differently at different scales. This is one of the key things that geographers do as they think about scale. You know, that think globally, act locally. But now we've got a lot more localism, locavorism. But so this is where we have the most impact. But where does our understanding of this come from? It probably comes into us. So there's kind of cascading waves of information, of understanding, of identification, of labeling, of language, all of that kind of coming in at us. And then we're doing something. And the ripples of whatever we do is moving from local out. Does that seem like a reasonable statement about life? Okay. So what I really like about this diagram, and at first it was all about, well, why didn't you include these things here or whatever. Now I really like the fact that there's a kid holding a globe. That's my favorite part of the diagram, yeah. Because this is it. There's a model of the world that this person holds. And that determines what they're going to do in this local environment, but it's shaped by factors at all of these scales. Okay, so I'm going to try and move on and get to some other exciting things. This is the first and only law of geography. It was said tongue-in-cheek, and then it stuck. So Waldo Tobler, who's from UC Santa Barbara, passed away about a year ago. Giant in geography. He brought geography into the realm of spatial science, thinking about how does space work? How do things interact across space? And he said, you know, for geographers, everything's related to everything else, but near things are more related than distant things. That's incredibly simple, but very valuable advice, and that's why people still talk about it 30 years later, because everything and everything means everything. Doesn't mean places, it means ideas, it means economic activities, it means political views, it means whether you like cat videos or puppy videos, you know, all of those things are related to everything else. It's all connected, that's why the mesh. Near things are related more than distant things. There's one way to understand near and distant, which is just in meters or feet or miles or kilometers, right? But what about in our connected world? So if you live in a city with an international airport, you actually might be better connected to London than you are to the place 3 hours drive out into the countryside. The connectivity is changing, right? So transportation technologies, linkages, communications technologies, they're pulling some things together. And when something gets closer and another thing is not pulled in, it gets relatively further away. So geography is this super dynamic thing. It is not at all about pointing to where things are on a map. This is why a map is so destructive. It's because it suggests all that stuff is just sitting there. Everything's doing something. Everything's in the process of becoming something or going away to become something else. So how do we start thinking about that? How do we come up with a version of geography that will actually help us understand what has happened, what is happening, and what is likely to happen in the future? So we don't need to think about geography as composed of places. We need to think about it as composed of flows. Everything's related to everything else. What's moving? What's connecting? What's What's that mean, relatedness? What's the relation? How do we think about the world? How do we think about space? How does that generate movement in certain directions and not in other directions? So guess what? Americans are not taking cruises to the Mexican Caribbean anymore the way they used to. And it has to do with representations of space. It doesn't necessarily have to do with the crime rate in Mexico. It has to do with the way the crime rate in Mexico is reported to you as a potential tourist traveling there on vacation. So then thinking about how does a place function? A college campus is a really interesting place because it's generated for this very specific purpose, and you can think about it, but it's got a lot of purposes managed all together. To think about this, you might just go walk in that Vietnam Veterans Memorial Grove. It's like literally 40 feet of paved sidewalk, and just sit there and go, what is this place doing? How is this place constructed? What is this? How does it function? And it's got more than one function. And then I want to get you into this idea of socio-spatial dialectic. It's kind of fun to say, just practice. Socio-spatial dialectic. It's basically this idea that geography and society, this environment that we live in, heavily modified and accommodating our activities, is in fact an artifact that we can decode to understand what society is. What is it? What's the values? Okay, so I put in, because we want to promote inquiry, right? I really, really believe in this, that letting questions lead us into information is way better than letting information lead us into questions. So here are some things, what kinds of things, by the way, all of these equally apply at a global, regional, and local scale. So what kinds of things flow between places? So you could get a map of, and I've got links in here, of the global shipping and see how shipping is. Thousands of ships moving around the world, but there's only about 200 places that ever receive or see one of those ships leave. It's a very distinct space of flows. Where does all that stuff go? It gets on trains, it gets on trucks, and it shows up in your grocery store. It's a very complex system of flows. So these things are happening at a global scale, they're also happening at a local scale. What's moving in and out of your community? Most of the kids that are taught in K-12 schools in California have an unfortunate situation of living in a suburb, which is a hard place to study the world from, because guess what? The suburb is a reserve of nothingness. There's benefits to that, but it is strategically designed to keep all of that complexity away. Kind of like, your kid's bed is like a place of refuge. It's like, that's what it is. It's an insulation. And it's particularly designed as an insulation for women and children, by the way. So we can look at, for example, some topics and look at the transatlantic slave trade. So if you click this link, and I've already gone way too long, so I'm not going to. It shows you every boat that ever moved a slave in the transatlantic slave trade as an animation. And it takes about 3 minutes to run, and you can see, you will instantly learn. I don't care if you wrote your dissertation on the Atlantic slave trade. You'll watch that one time and you'll go, oh, I just learned something I didn't know. You'll just see something about the spatiality and the temporality of it that you'll never have seen. So these are all links that can help you. But also that music that your kid hits on their phone, and that's the most important thing to them, where does it come from? It actually comes from real places. It doesn't come from the internet. Nothing comes from the internet. So representations of space. This is really, really underappreciated. We act on what we think is happening out there, not on what is actually happening. So we can think about these things. We can look at a map like the New Yorker's view of the United States and say, that's funny, but true. We can look at this map that California's produced very similarly. That says, well, California is about 200 delightful, easy miles from California, and Florida is 17,000 dangerous miles, and it's a death swamp. Actually, Death Valley, turns out, is there. Every harbor in California is labeled as the world's finest harbor. That's Californians' view of the world. When World War II broke out and we realized we were in the era of kind of global warfare, Fortune magazine, which had never had a map, in its pages said, we need to start printing maps all the time. And we need to make sure it's not like the one that was lovely creation on the whiteboard over there, which is a flat rectangular surface meant to depict the world, because when you look at that, guess what? America's safely in one corner, Soviet Union is safely in the other corner, and so Americans were like, that's going to take a long time for them to get here, I'm not worried. Oh, it's actually our closest neighbor. Oh, wow, okay. Need to think about the world as a sphere. Right? The astronauts had a lot to say about this when they got up and saw the big blue marble, right? So this is in a 1940 LA Examiner. Same thing. By the way, this is right before we entered into, what? An alliance with Russia. But we were already saying they're the enemy. So a polar azimuthal projection to make it clear. Them, us, right next door. Stop thinking we're on separate sides. And even this crazy projection. So we're not taking ships across the ocean with slaves anymore, so that map's not all that useful. This one actually turns out to be more useful for understanding the world within which we want to make decisions. But at 1945, the war ended, and this very optimistic cartographer created a new map of the world, said, let's spread it back out, and by the way, instead of the equator just being a line, we'll put this lovely thing that no spot on Earth is more than 40 flying hours from your local airport. So let's reframe the world not as an arena of conflict, but as a bunch of consumable tourist experiences. It's 1945, let's move on. Okay, maps aren't the only spatial representations. So people acted differently towards the slums in New York after Jacob Riis figured out how to go in there and take photographs. Or after Dorothea Lange figured out how to document the Dust Bowl migrations. Landscape painting, European landscape painting, actually caused a lot of people to come over to the US searching for different things. It also, by the way, is the reason we have lawns. There's no lawn until European landscape painting shows castles with lawns. Then suddenly, you know what my house needs to look better is a lawn. Or we have this mural in Los Angeles that was just restored. What's it called? America Tropical by Siqueiros. So this was paid for by civic leaders of Los Angeles, said, let's do one of those awesome Mexican murals you do, a really prominent spot. And then he unveiled it, and it was basically about how Americans were killing the continent. Killing the continent and everything in it. And they covered it up real quick for about 80 years. So, also thinking about a place, how it works from the inside out. Your kids are already experts. I don't care what grade they are geographic experts. They use spatial strategies to navigate through places that have different values, different functions. Think about how they avoid adult supervision. This is an incredibly sophisticated geographic strategy they're using to understand your territorial authority and avoid it. So we can ask questions about how do places work for the people inside of them and the places outside. So when I was in San Francisco for NCSS, went to this fabulous museum, the Tenderloin Museum. Anybody been to it? Excellent. I can't recommend it enough. Also the Plaza Cultura y Arte in LA, same kind of museum, incredible geography. So Tenderloin, oh, it's this bad neighborhood. Well, how did it get that name? It's because the cops who were on the tape could buy the best cuts of meat. And everybody noticed, hey, how are those cops buying all this really expensive cuts of meat? Well, they were looking the other way, so lots of unsavory things could happen there. So it became associated with vice and all this stuff that people would rather not admit they were doing. But it also turned out, because of that, it was the only place that women who were coming into the city for new employment opportunities could live without male supervision. So they weren't all prostitutes. Actually, they were productive workers, and they became unionized. And so the Tenderloin, this hotbed of criminal, socially dysfunctional activity, was actually a place where people who were excluded from mainstream opportunities could find opportunities that they didn't see other places. So long before the Castro, long before even Stonewall, the Tenderloin was a place for transgender communities. People, LGBTQ, all of that represented. And in fact, in 1966, There was a riot at, I think it was called Compton Cafeteria. Yeah. Before the Stonewall riots. Oh, and then jazz and acid rock. Yes, started there, moved to the Haight, but you couldn't afford to be in other parts of the city, so you started in the Tenderloin. That's where the studios for the black jazz musicians or the acid rock musicians were. So all of this productive stuff. But then the external definition, when Lyndon Johnson's War on Poverty comes around, they actually say, you're not included. You're a bunch of freaks who decided to live that way. We're talking about those people who've been discriminated against structurally, and that's why they're in disadvantage, so you get no help. Dianne Feinstein says you don't deserve help. And so what happens, it continues to be a throwaway neighborhood, continues to be a devalued place, which means it's a place of opportunity for people with limited resources. It's an immigrant neighborhood where immigrants can come and open businesses, be successful, and then buy up blocks and blocks of property. These neighborhoods exist all around Southern California and coastal California. You have people launching public health campaigns and educational campaigns, for lack of a better word, because there's so much work to be done here. You know what gives you a lot of authority? When you're a volunteer. When you show up and you're a volunteer, like, you can do anything, because it's a contribution. So in these kinds of neighborhoods, it's not like you need approval, you just start doing it. And so lots of really good things come out of that. Okay, I know that was really overly quick, but it's 11 o'clock and you might have something to do in a little bit. So I just want to talk just a minute about sociospatial dialectic, and by a minute I mean 5. So sociospatial dialectic, simple idea, trial by space. So Henri Lefebvre, very important social theorist, in about 1970 we translate this to English. I forget when he actually wrote it, about 10 years before that. But he says, no idea will survive if it cannot define its own space. So all of our political, social, economic ideas, they have to make logical sense in the context of real spaces. If they don't, it'll go away. So an example of this is the nuclear family is the appropriate milieu for raising children. Ask Native American communities about their experience with child welfare services, and they'd say, oh my God, they only understand one mom, one dad. They don't understand that it takes a village. That's actually what we do, and they take our kids away for not providing proper parenting. So how does this idea of this nuclear family becomes so durable in the United States, which is in fact kind of unique to us? It has to do with space. So, for example, you make borders, it generates different outcomes. So, South Korea, North Korea. This is an imaginary line, by the way. It does not exist before we build a whole bunch of stuff and militarize it. Similarly, this one. US, Mexico, which is which? No, seriously, I'm asking.
Yeah.
Which one's this?
America.
Okay. All those who think Mexico? It's Mexico, because the southern border of the United States is a repellent for American activities. It's an attractant for Mexican economic activities. The gradient is there's gobs of money here, there's significantly less money here, so crowd over. Get involved in that. So we can also look at how when we draw state boundaries and do electoral college stuff, how Wyoming's vote is worth 2.6 times of California's vote, because, one person, one vote. We can look at grotesque congressional districts and talk about the way this is used to manipulate outcomes so that in Wisconsin you can get 63% of the districts with 42% of the vote. Just happened. So people do these gerrymandering workshops to show how that can happen. But also like our schools, our playgrounds, the tot lot, and then the older kids lot. Do we really not want them together? That's kind of strange. What's up with that? Oh, we're afraid that the big kids will murder the small kids. Oh, I forgot. They might not teach them, they might murder them. Or our schools where, we don't want the 7th and 8th graders around the 5th graders. Keep them on reservations. Keep them separate. We're socially defining what childhood is by the buildings that we create for them. We're actually, when we put all these fences and all these containers and the school's like walled off, what we're saying is we don't believe you're smart enough to stay inside here and not get snatched. I mean, that's one of the messages. It's not the only one, but it's one of them. I teach urban geography, and midway through the semester,